Welcome to Fret Reps. Here's the complete Triad series, all in one video. Today we're going to introduce triads, a chord made of 3 notes. As simple as triads are, they're also complex when you really get into it. So I'm going to break it up into a series of videos. This first video will introduce triads in its most basic form, the 1-3-5, on the top 3 strings only. Videos after this one will be going in deeper, showing different shapes on different strings, showing how they relate to chords on the C major scale, and how you can switch triads horizontally, vertically, as well as in an angle. Each video will continue where the last one left off. When you have finished watching this triad video series, you will have a new understanding of how everything is related. Prerequisites: hand patterns video. Neck labels, optional. Watching these 2 videos first will make this video easier to understand. Triads are the magic that builds chords, arpeggios, harmony, and melody. If you want to know your guitar neck, scales are just the avenues, but it's the triads that make music. If you stick with this series, you'll get a solid understanding of triads. You'll never be lost on the neck, you'll understand harmony, and you will be magic. But before I can tell you about triads, you need to know about dyads. Dyads are 2 notes. You could play any song with dyads, so guitar could be played with only 2 fingers, if you wanted to. There are 2 types of dyads, the first and the third, and the first and the fifth. Well, to be honest, any 2 notes are a dyad, but you'll go a long way with only these 2. So let's look at these 2 dyads. The shapes you're looking for are the minor third, the major third, the fifth, and the fifth with the octave. To get an idea of the octave and fifth, think of a power chord, the 1-5 and the octave. That's 2 dyads, the 1 and 5, and the 5 and the octave. So if you play the 1-on-1 string, all these options can be found on the next string. This would be the minor, the major, the 4th, and a 5th. A 4th is just a 5 octave of a different chord. This will be handy to know later on. Now, how do dyads relate to triads? Simple. Every triad is made up of 2 dyads, a major and a minor and a major, 2 minors, and a power chord. All chords are made of multiple dyads. Here's an example of playing only dyads, with only 2 fingers.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the 4th, the 5th, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Triad basics. Here are the basics of a triad, playing only the top 3 strings and starting on A like we always do. Starting with hand pattern 1, which you learned in the hand pattern video. That's ABC. Your pinky is on the C. Now pivot on your pinky and rotate the hand so the first finger is 2 strings down. Your ring finger should be on the 2nd string down. Now you have a straight line going in an angle. This is your first triad and it's a C major chord. All these triads will take its name from the pinky note. Leaving your hand in the same position but playing hand pattern 2, you're still on the C note, but it's now a minor chord. Those 2 fingers in the middle that are the difference between a hand pattern 1 and a hand pattern 2 are what make a chord major or minor. If you notice, the C minor has a black note under it. This just means that there is no C minor in the C major Ionian scale. More about why in the next video. horizontal triads. For now, I want you to move your hand up or down the neck, playing only the top 3 strings. Focus on your pinky. As you move your pinky up or down the neck while following the white notes only, the other 2 fingers will also land on a white note only. It'll either be a hand pattern 1, a hand pattern 2, or a hand pattern 3. Simple, right? Only one triad will be a hand pattern 3. For those following along with the fret labels, you'll find it soon enough. This is the basics of a triad and how the order of the chords are related to the scale. This is how you find what chords are available to you in that key. As you go up and down the neck, listen to the chords. Count the notes starting with C as number 1. Going up 1 note is number 2. Play in order up and down the scale. You can play it as a chord, all 3 notes at the same time, or as an arpeggio, 1 note at a time. It may be tempting to play the next set of strings because it's easier to get to that note. Take it as a challenge to limit yourself to the top 3 strings. There's one last thing I want you to practice repeatedly. Using hand pattern 1, start on C major. Focusing on your pinky and move down 4 white notes using the same hand pattern. This is a G major. Normally you don't play a G major this way, but for now, just do it this way. This will strengthen your pinky. Then move back up to the C major. Then slide up 4 white notes to the F major without changing the hand pattern. Then slide back down to the C major. Always use hand pattern 1. Those are the only chords on those 3 strings that you can have a white note under each finger of hand pattern 1. Here are some interesting things about this chord combination. It consists of the 1-4-5, the most popular chord combination on earth. Also, these are all the major chords available to you on the C major scale. There are 2 minors between each major, if you play the diminished as a dyad. And probably the most interesting fact about this combination, one that will do you good to remember, is where they are positioned. The C major is in the middle of the scale and the only other majors are on each end of the scale. Of course, this is referring to the E string on the guitar instrument only. This is part 2 of the Triad series, Chord Construction. Now that you know the basic triad, the 1-3-5, it's important to understand chord construction before we continue on with this series. The prerequisites for this video are: learn the scales without the guitar series, neck labels, and of course part 1 of this series. Watching this series out of order can be confusing if you're new to guitar. The theory of constructing a chord is ridiculously easy. But you have to know the scale that you're playing first. Let's look at the C major scale. Seeing the C major scale with the help of these neck labels makes understanding and constructing a chord easy. Some purists may say it's cheating to have those labels on the neck. Just because they had to learn the guitar without them doesn't mean it's cheating. After all, the piano has it organized this way. That would mean Mozart was cheating. Yeah, okay. If you're not using these labels, the learning scales without the guitar video can help you memorize the scales. Starting on A, like we always do, play every other note, going up 2 octaves. That's the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th. These are all the available notes in the A minor chord. If you start on C, it's all the notes in a C major chord. No matter where you start, every other note in the scale are all the available notes in that chord. You don't have to play all these notes, just as many as you want. Most basic chords in Western music are just the first 3 or 4 of every other note, the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and/or 7th. Adding a 9th can pretty up a chord even more. But any more than that, you tend to lean more in the jazz arena. If you play a chord that's more than 3 notes, it's more than likely to be a bar chord. That is, unless you're playing the chords at the top of the neck utilizing open strings. Digging a little deeper into this every other note schematic, here is an interesting fact. If you look at every other note going up 2 octaves, 1 through 7 is in the first octave. The 8th is your first octave. But if you notice, the 8th is not in the sequence. The 9th through the 15th is in the next octave, and the 15th is the second octave. So when playing every other note, you have to go 2 octaves before it lands back on the key note. If you look at it even deeper, 9 is actually the octave of the 2. The 9th, 11th, 13th, and 15th are the octaves of the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and the 1st octave. The same notes, just an octave above. Do you know what this means? This means every note in the scale are the notes in the chord. A scale is just a chord all laid out, 1 note at a time, combined in 1 octave. This is why if you're playing the right scale for the key you're in, any note you play will work. When soloing, it's best to hold, land, or stop on just one of the first 3 or 4 notes of the first half of the every other note sequence. This will give a strong, more satisfying feel. Now that you know that every other note in the scale is your option, how do you play it in a chord? Starting in C, looking at every other note on 1 string. Now play the 3rd and find it on the next string. Here's a hint, it's the major 3rd dyad, which you learned in part 1. Then if you match the 5th, it's adding a minor dyad, which in turn makes this a C major triad. Knowing triad shapes will do all the work for you. You can continue matching notes on more strings. Just remember, no matter where you are moving up or down, every other note is a good option for notes in the chord key that you're playing in. If you move up 1 note, it's more than likely to be a new chord, a key change. Now learning the triad shapes and being aware of the shape you're in will always give you options that sound good. As we move forward with this Triad series, you should be aware that all the triads will be working with the every other note sequence exclusively. This is part 3 of the Triad series, vertical triads. Recap. What you learned in part 1. How every triad is made up of 2 dyads, a major and a minor, or a minor and a major, or the diminished. Also, that the chord name is taken from the first third of the triad, a major third or a minor third. When thinking dyads, your note options are a 3rd or a 5th, which can all be found on the next string. And a 4th is just a 5th and the octave of a different chord. Every note you are presently on has these options. And what you learned in part 2, you also know the construction of a chord, every other note. Now that you know dyads and no triads going up and down the top 3 strings, it's time to look at how these triads translate to the other strings. It's important to know that it would be best to practice the horizontal triads exhaustively first. I mean, do them repeatedly for hours or days before you move on to this video. Doing this will make this video a breeze. Why? Because your hands will already be comfortable with that triad shape, and your ear will be thoroughly trained on what each triad sounds like in the order they are within. So much so that when you stop playing the guitar, you'll still hear the chords playing in your head, like a song stuck in your head that plays all day and night. Playing these triad shapes on other strings gives you the convenience of having a chord change closer to the last chord, instead of having a long reach from chord to chord. On the guitar, you can find the same chord in different areas on the neck. For instance, in part 1, you practiced the 1-4-5 CFG, but you can play all these chords in this position. The next group of 3 strings is going to be easy for your hand because it's the same hand shape as the first set of 3 strings, just shifted down. On the top 3 strings, the A is on the 5th fret, but on the next 3 strings, it's on the first open string. On both the first 3 and the second 3 strings, the triads that are close to the top of the neck, close to the nut, can't be played with the hand patterns 1 or 2. You just can't make that shape because the other notes are off the neck. This is why on the top 3 strings, we only did the G major at the bottom and the F major at the top of the 2 ends of the practice range. We'll practice other shapes later. For now, get this shape burned into your muscles. I want you to go back and forth between the top 3 strings and the next 3 strings to find similar sounding triads. If you're using the fret labels, this will be easy because you can see where the shapes are. You just need to use your ears to find the ones that sound the same. Here's a hint. They will always be 5 frets down from the top 3 strings. Remember that this chord order repeats, so some chords will be closer. For instance, on the top 3 strings, the F major is on the top end and the G major is on the bottom end of the chord range of the scale. But these 2 chords are actually right next to each other. It'll just be an octave difference. Now on these next 3 strings, C is on the 3rd fret. I want you to consider this to be the bottom reach of the chord range and the 12th fret, A, to be your top reach of the chord range. After spending time on these 3 strings going up and down repeatedly, you can go to the next 3 strings. Because of the B string shift, the triad shape will change. If you're using the fret labels, it'll be easy to see where the difference will be. Your pinky will no longer be the top note. The major will usually be the first, middle, and ring fingers. The ring finger will be the note you use to guide when going up and down the neck. The minor will have the ring finger as the key note and the first finger barring the next 2 strings. Remember to focus here. This is your key. Every key has its major or minor third related to it. So think dyad, but play a triad. This is training your awareness of where you are, what you're on, and what's around you. Because of the B string shift, the last 3 strings will also be yet another hand shape. The minor will look like the major on the previous 3 strings, and the major will be the ring finger, pinky under the ring finger, and the first finger playing a minor dyad. Another way would be the middle finger as your top note and the ring finger underneath, then your first finger on the last string. Practice these shapes up and down the neck, listening intently to each change. Burn these shapes into your muscle memory. Keep in mind that we are only practicing 1 triad sequence, the 1st, 3rd, and 5th. Part 4. The grand illusion of music theory. That's a bold claim. What I'm about to prove to you should blow your mind. It's all related to C major. In this short video, I'll show you how all chords are just the C major chord. I'm going to show you how going diagonally instead of vertically or horizontally, you can not only find all the notes in a chord, but find all the other chords in the C major chord. You heard that right. All the other chords inside the C major chord. Because all the chords in the C major scale are the chords that make up the C major chord. Sounds confusing, I know. Watch how I explain this. As I mentioned in part 2, construction of a chord, every other note for 2 octaves are all the optional notes for a chord, and how every other note compressed into 1 octave is the C major scale. And finally, in part 1, how 2 dyads make a triad and how multiple triads can make a fuller chord. Applying what you learned from the first 3 videos, all of this comes into play now. Let's make a chord. Start on C, in the C major scale, all the white notes. In these available notes, we focus on every other note. Those are all the available notes for a chord. The C major triad is the smallest chord you can make. Why? Because it's the first 3 notes of the every other note sequence. You can't get any smaller. You can choose any combination of notes within the every other note sequence. There is a pattern, though. Here's a hint: every single note in the C major scale has a 3rd dyad associated with it. So, no matter what note you put your finger on the neck, there's always a 3rd ready to harmonize with it. You also have minor dyads, major dyads, and a 5th. Even though dyads aren't considered a chord, they are part of a chord. Every single one can be turned into a chord. So if you have a C with a major 3rd, major dyad, you know it's starting to be a part of the C major triad. So a C major dyad and an E minor dyad together are a C major chord, a triad. Do this to every dyad in the sequence and you have all the chords in the C major scale. Let's look a little deeper into dyads. Let's meet the dyad family. Look at it like this. In the house of harmony lives Caesar, a singer. Caesar has a wife, 2 daughters, and 2 sons. They love to sing. Now let's look at the neck. Caesar is the first note. He holds the key to the house of harmony. When Caesar sings, his family wants to join in. On the next string, Caesar's wife Dominique sings a 5th along with Caesar. They together are a power couple. They both keep the house of harmony in order. Caesar's oldest daughter starts to sing. She looks up to her dad and sings a positive note to make Caesar sound good. She is the major 3rd. Then there's her little sister, the minor 3rd. She's a bit moody. Then you have Caesar Jr., the octave. Chip off the old block. He's ready to take over the key and have his own wife and kids. They are the 2nd generation. And, of course, there is always the black sheep of the family. He's the double minor diminished or the flat 5. He rebels to disturb the peace. He stands between Junior and his dad. Junior also has a defiant son who stands between him and his oldest son, just like his dad. At home, Caesar is the head and holds the key. But when Caesar is at work, he's not the boss. He passes the key to someone else. His boss has a son named Octavia. His son is the 4th. This now makes Caesar the 5th. The 4th is the octave, the chip off the block of another note. The boss who holds the key. Caesar lives 2 lives. One where he is the one with the key, and the other where he is the 5th. His home and his job. The 2 shall never mix. So any note you land on has its own family of notes on the next string. No matter where you are on the neck, you have a choice of notes on the next string that want to sing harmony to your note. You can even have 2 families sing together because they're all related in one way or another. Now let's see how multiple dyad families come together to make chords. Every triad is made of 2 dyads and every chord is made up of multiple dyads. Each dyad in a triad are polar opposite of each other. Either a major and a minor, or a minor and a major, or the awkward diminished with its 2 minors. So if you start on C in the C major scale, the 3rd for the C will be a major. Starting with a major, you know the next one will be a minor, the opposite. But this is where it gets good. Keep going in this direction to find the next every other note in the sequence. The next one is the opposite yet again, which means it has to be a major 3rd dyad. The pattern here is the swing from major to minor back and forth. Adding imaginary strings beyond the guitar shows the pattern continue either way. That is, up until you hit the diminished double minor. Playing a triad sequence in an angle means you just keep adding a major or a minor third dyad back and forth. And every dyad you add to a chord is a major or minor chord of its own. So switching back and forth from major to minor in a diagonal will hit every other note in the scale, which are your available notes for a chord. Let's start again, and I'll point out all the chords in the C major chord in the C major scale. Fair warning, this can get confusing. I should explain this display. On top, we have all the notes in the every other note sequence. The green box tells you all the notes that have been added so far. On the left is a display of the current C chord that is created with every other note. On the bottom are all the chords in the C major chord. And in the middle center, in baby blue notes, are all the every other notes for a chord, all over the neck. Next to that are the purple notes. These are just showing you the identical notes that are displayed in red. The green box confines all the notes in the current C chord, or the current chord in the C major chord list. Come on, this'll be fun. Starting on C, we add a major third, and this adds the E note. This is a C major dyad. Adding a minor third to this adds the fifth, the G. This G note makes the E and E minor dyad. Add a major third, and this adds the B. This makes the G a G major dyad. The B added to the C chord transforms the chord into a C major 7. I'm going to keep adding thirds in this direction, but this isn't how you'll make the C chord. All these notes can be played in different spots on the neck for easier fingering. For now, we'll continue this way. Adding a minor third adds the D note. Together with the B is a B minor, but starting to become a B diminished triad. But the D, played with the C major chord, is now a C major 9. Add another minor third, adds the note F, which makes the D a D minor dyad. By adding the F to our C chord, it turns the chord into a C major 11. Adding a major third adds the A note, which makes the F an F major dyad. But the A note transforms our chord into C major 13. And adding the last minor third, the note C, makes the A an A minor dyad. The C is the final octave. It's interesting that the relative minor to the C major is the last triad in the sequence. Now, this is oversimplifying. It gets deeper, but learn this first, and the rest of guitar learning will make more sense. Now, let's look at this same chord order, but going up the neck. Play a C major, then go up every other note. The chords are the same and are major, minor, major, diminished, minor, major, minor. This is also useful when soloing. No matter what chord you're in, go to every other note and play a triad arpeggio. This will extend the chord that you're playing and give you a wider harmonic range for soloing. Practice this frequently to lock this into mental and muscle memory. Doing this will expand your fluency. I think this proves that every chord in the C major scale is just an extension or inversion of the C major chord. Triads. Part 5. Other triad shapes. Now that we've tackled the 1-3-5 triad, let's look at other shapes. Let's start in C, in the C major scale. The first triad you learned is the first 3 notes of the every other note sequence. Before we continue, let's remind ourselves about the dyads. Your dyad options are always the 3rd or the 5th. You may ask, what about the 4th? You have the 4th, but when playing in the key of C major, the 4th isn't part of the chord's local family. The 4th makes a good passing tone when creating a melody, but you don't want to stop on the 4th because that'll change your root note into an F. When playing a 1-5 dyad, you can either play the 1 and the 5 or the 5 and the octave of the 1, which is still a 5th dyad, but now it's a 5-1. So both the 1-5 and the 5-1 are a fifth power chord dyad. When you play a fourth with the C, this turns the C into a fifth and the fourth into the 1 of an F power chord. It's important to understand this because we will be referring to it a lot. What about the sixth? Not on the adjacent string as a dyad, because playing a C with its sixth on the adjacent string makes the sixth an octave of the A chord and the C a third of the A minor chord. So from the 1, your only options are the third and the fifth. We've done the 1-3-5, but what if you played the fifth on the adjacent string? Now consider from the point of view of the fifth as if it was the 1. You can add a third dyad or a fifth dyad, just like the C. The third from the fifth is the 7th of the C, and the fifth of the fifth is the 9th of the C. But from the perspective of the fifth, you can also have the fourth. The fourth is no longer outside of the local family, because the fourth of the fifth is the octave of the 1. This octave is a C, which makes it a fifth power chord dyad. Now you have your triad shapes for the 7th, the power chord, and the 9th. Go up and down these 3 strings to get a feel for the other positions on the neck. The next 3 strings will have the same shapes, so practice them here as well. Just remember that when you change strings, you're switching to a new chord, and the 1 for that chord, the root, will be a different note, not a C. When you get to the next 3 strings, you're going to run into the B string shift, so the hand pattern will change. Just remember to start with your 1 and the 5, then choose the 3, 4, or 5 of the 5. Each option will still be a 7th, a power chord, or a 9th, but of the new root note. Same advice for the last 3 strings. With these neck labels, it's really easy to see your options. I have a DIY video and free downloadable printable graphics for the neck. Link in the description. As a reminder, for even more shapes, you could do a third to the C with all those other options with the 5, whether the 5 is a part of it or not.